Part 1. Forgive me, for this will be very lengthy and unfocused, but this is the only way I know right now. If these sentences make me seem like I'm repeating myself, that's because I am, and I will do so until you wake yourself up. After all, your whole life has been for that purpose. All lives are for that purpose. We are forever trying to help ourselves reach enlightenment. So how does one actually do it? The beginner answer, I suppose, would be to do enough meditation or psychedelics until your ego dies, which is simultaneously the most painful and rewarding experience one can have because you finally figure out who you are and what all this is. The true answer is to stop reaching. What you are searching for has already been found by you, ad infinitum. It is now, and it always has been now. I can speak forever about the mystery of the cosmos and consciousness, how self-realization is possible for everyone, and even how the transcendent is a realm of limitless creativity. But the truth is, enlightenment can never be conveyed by words. My words on their own will never be enough to give anyone else complete insight. The best we can do as humans is to use intermediary symbols, such as words, to convey proximate meaning, and this is only sometimes able to trigger immediate understanding within another. Ultimately, however, we all come to understanding in our own way, and the nature of it is always the same. Just like suffering is always suffering and pleasure is always pleasure, regardless of the vessel. We all perceive to the extent of our concepts. This is why there's an emergence of memory. Before a certain point, we are not knowledgeable of enough symbols to conceptualize and compress events. I mean, hell, try thinking about thinking before language, and try having a past when you have no concept of past. It is impossible. The symbols and concepts that define our experience are temporary, but hardly ever make us realize the truth about experience itself. Quantum mechanics was useful for me, however, because it so directly demonstrates that the only certainty about conscious experience is that it's always now. In other words, complexity or form only appears to someone simply because they are seeing it. Your reality is only a narrow slice of all possible perspectives, but it is of the utmost necessity, because without it, none of the other perspectives would be possible. The universe is held together entirely through your own perception. Everything is linked in this infinite chain of karma. By being of the universe, you are the universe. This is the true meaning of relativity. Everything else is only in relation to you, the observer. Only you can know what you are observing. You do not know about something, quite literally doesn't factor into your reality, and so for all purposes involving you, it is not real. The trick to understanding that is to first comprehend that because you are your entire universe, everything must involve you. It truly is like an infinite block. All of space and time are just one thing. We view it as many different processes, but really it is just one ultimate process, one organism. The same way that trillions of cells comprise our own body, billions of humans comprise the internet, which is already the perfect infrastructure for an intelligence of its own, even though we don't realize it. Complexity at one level becomes unity at the next. I mean, where do you think Darwin's brilliance came from? It came from the recognition of the fact that all living things are interconnected. But it's not just living things. It's everything that ever was or will be. It's all one. The fate of each of us is inseparable from the fate of the universe. The existence of everything entirely depends on you. Complexity continues so long as you see it, life continues so long as you live it, and your reality is real so long as you believe in it. In this way, we are all God, which is why we refer to ourselves with the same capital I. Those who know who they really are control every aspect of their reality by being one with it. Free will is thus paradoxical, because it is only one will. Your train of thought goes on forever, beyond any birth or death. Your streams of consciousness cannot be separated from one another because they are all of the same mind. Your quote-unquote unique or original ideas are just the same one idea that takes inspiration from it all. Yet even though every thought is a product of what comes before and after it, the ego maintains its illusion of control. The person you think you are doesn't decide when and who to be born to, and the person you think you are definitely doesn't decide when to decide to do something, because that decision goes exponentially beyond any ego. Who you think you are doesn't decide to beat your heart, to have thoughts, to kill one of your cells, to fall in love, and to die. It all just happens, out of your control, like a chain of dominoes leading to you from every direction in space-time. And even if you conjecture that the brain has some fundamentally quantum aspect to it, which creates its randomness, I would still argue that Laplace's demon hangs over you, whether that's with wave function collapse or many worlds. After all, with the demon supremely knowledgeable about all forces of nature, you cannot prove to me he doesn't know something about wave function collapse that remains inaccessible to us. The very nature of this universe is that it will always have hidden variables to our science. And if the wave function never collapses, which seems more plausible, then it only appears like random succession to an observer because every possible outcome is in fact observed. Randomness at one level is determinism at the next. Master Oogway was right. There are no accidents. You are exactly where you should be at this moment, so why not accept it? The reason for us to be here is that in order for us not to be here, we would have to be here. In order to understand oneself, you must first understand everything around you, and vice versa. In order to understand non-duality, you must first understand duality and vice versa. The reason why people do not understand God is because they do not yet understand themselves. We were all responsible for learning all of the concepts needed to project our exact reality, and so we each cause a manifestation of the world around us as it is. Everyone is personally responsible for their whole universe being here. That is why the beauty you see in art is only the beauty that you put there. Art cannot be inherently beautiful because it is only a concept relative to the observer. If art were not a concept for you at all, then you would not notice the beauty of a painting, for example, because everything else would be equally as beautiful. The same is true for color. Think about it. If you were never required by society to differentiate arbitrary segments on the EMR spectrum, how would you perceive colors? Would you categorize colors at all? If you never learned to distinguish yourself from the world, would you perceive a world at all? Or would it all just be one thing, and by that same token, no thing? After all, something always implies nothing. The two would be meaningless without the other. Allow me to bring up another example of how our concepts create our reality using math. What are the first principles of math? In other words, what is the foundation which allowed for all other groundbreaking innovations of the material world, such as architecture, physics, and money? Really think about it. What lies at the origin? What must be the unshakable ground on which the entire scientific world stands? The answer is that there is no ground. It's all just built on an illusion. In math and science, the first principles are what we call axioms, laws taken to be true simply because. I remember watching many years ago an interview with Feynman that demonstrated this for me. The interviewer asked him, "Why do magnets repel each other?" To which he replied by speaking about how there are limits to our own questioning. One cannot explain the concept of the magnetic force unless they additionally have the concept of the electrical force. Our concepts rely on each other but cannot sustain themselves. Because of this, we cannot truly answer why any natural phenomena occurs beyond the relativistic framework that our axioms provide us with. Beyond its axioms, a subject and all of its symbols become meaningless. For instance, to a mathematician in our own society, Euler's identity might represent an elegant equation built on millennia of development. But to someone else who did not share a math's axioms, it is just a bunch of scribbles. The mathematician could try all he wants to, but he would never be able to explain that equation to someone who did not first understand the need for equations, numbers and negative numbers, squares and square roots, the concept of zero, circles, logarithms, and basically all of calculus. Do you see now why education is illusory if one already starts with a complete understanding of their world? No understanding is any more or less valid, because it simply depends on the present awareness, the quality of which is always the same. Euler's equation and every other equation is fundamentally meaningless equals meaningless, so obviously it was eventually going to be derived. We can think of a million ways of writing that same fact, but it doesn't change anything. This is why it is a myth that the Western world only brought with it advancement, using its rational, materialist approach. Nothing can be gained without equal sacrifice. The universe balances itself out. By connecting with technology, we've lost connection to the spirit. By globalizing and industrializing, we've killed an unfathomable number of trees and animals. And even though lifespan was improved with modern medicine and certain diseases were eradicated, a whole new array of illnesses now plague us, such as obesity, diabetes, ADHD, and depression. Who's to say we needed industry when we were happier as hunter-gatherers? Who's to say we needed doctors if tribes were happy with their shamans? Who's to say we needed technology if it was going to come with nuclear warheads? And finally, who's to say we needed science for understanding when every culture already had a spiritual tradition? Alas, change is inevitable, even though it is never for the better or worse. The God of the wild is the same as the God of technology because we are slaves to both of their conceptual implications. Concepts emerge out of other concepts in an endless cycle, but it is all in our head. We only believe in the indisputable reality of our ideas because we were conditioned to for the sake of the system. But someone completely different than us would never be convinced. After all, how could one believe in doors if they did not first believe in houses? And do all houses need doors? How could one believe in money if everything in their small tribe was shared? And how could one believe in time unless they already had the conceptual toolkit necessary to believe in it? These wild abstractions shape our reality, but again, the bottom line is that they are only relative to the society in which they are used. When I first learned that the language you speak subliminally creates your perception of time and space, I was mind blown. We are so used to visualizing time as something that flows from left to right or back to front, but Hebrew and Arabic speakers will order a series of images in chronological order from right to left, and Malagasy speakers visualize the landscape of the past in front of them since they can see it, while the future is behind them since they can't see it. And then there are the Puraha, who don't even have linguistic concepts for numbers, colors, and past and future, simply because they don't have a need for them. They only live in the present, and are some of the happiest people in the world because of it. If such radically distinct spatio-temporal and numerical processing exists across humanity's own cultures, then what does that imply about the foundations of knowledge? Why would another culture with its own axioms have a need for technology or philosophy that is the product of our axioms? The belief that our science and math is the most correct way simply because we were able to impose it on the rest of the world astounds me. Now, unsurprisingly, many ideas have emerged within math that elegantly try to demonstrate its own limits. Take Russell's paradox, or Gödel's incompleteness theorem, for example. The big problem, however, is that when most people come across such concepts, they only use a relativistic lens of mathematics without seeing the concept for what it really is. This is absurd. How can you use math to understand math? How can you use a word to define that word? Relying on a single institution to come to truth is so clearly circular, and yet so many of us are guilty of this practice. So many, including Russell himself, fail to resolve the ultimate paradox of reality, which results in the thousands of inconclusive pages such as in his Principia Mathematica. No matter how hard we try, we will be unable to completely formalize our own logic, and every attempt to do so creates more contradictions. It helps no one to solve problems by creating new ones. The one and only key to understanding is non-understanding, and until this is accepted, humanity will forever chase its own tail with more and more concepts. This is why I laugh when I hear scientists saying that only their institution is for truth, and that eventually it is all going to amount to some grand unifying equation which will explain the underlying fabric of reality. If science really were for truth, then shouldn't its only goal be to end science? Science forever leads to more science, because it can never attain an understanding that is beyond itself. We once held that the smallest building blocks are atomic particles. Then we moved to the subatomic. Then in the 70s we came up with a standard model. This pursuit, like any other, is a flawed approach to understanding. Structure will forever repeat itself in an endless recursive function. It is impossible to use materialism to find base reality because base reality is itself not material. Science only keeps yielding more and more materials because it keeps searching, not because it is actually making progress towards the it. And what is it? I've already said, it is understanding itself. How can we ever reach it if we keep adding more and more concepts without understanding the ones we've already got? So, after all that, which one of you self-labeled mathematicians really understands your field? Did we invent math, or is math a fundamental property of the universe? And do you realize yet why that is the same as asking, did we invent God, or is God a fundamental property of the universe? If you are able to answer either question, the other one will appear obvious. And if you are unable to answer, then you believe in math in the same way that you believe in God, and you haven't understood either yet. Math and science are simultaneously created and discovered. There is no way around that ultimate paradox. It is the same as with the question of free will. We seemingly discover math because of a predetermined path that was laid out by its first axioms. And at the same time, one would think that we were the ones who created those axioms. However, upon closer examination, it is impossible to pinpoint such a first, as everything is predicated on what came before it. There is no end because you cannot find the beginning. It is an endless chain of cause and effect with no valid first cause. Now, I'm not claiming that our current science and technology is wrong per se. I'm just making the point that it was inevitable to come to this perspective with an infinite process. Obviously, when you believe in a concept, your entire universe will become tainted by it. It is no coincidence that the artist finds art everywhere in nature, the religious person finds God everywhere in nature, and the mathematician finds math everywhere in nature. I have been a believer in all three, and so I know this phenomena all too well. If you believe in something, then it seems to believe in you. But unfortunately, belief does not imply understanding. I mean, how egotistical is it for us to assume that our human concepts are enough to understand the universe from every perspective? No. Human concepts are just useful for understanding our own world, nothing outside of that. Do you really think an alien species, or even other species on our own planet, have the same need for a definition of a circle? Or have the same definition? And if those species do not agree with our own axiomatic principles, how do we then convince them of the legitimacy of our world? Would we claim that their world is less valid? Belief is simply not enough here, and that goes for every concept, whether it's math, religion, or art. We must go beyond. We must resolve difference. If half of the world is scientific and the other half is religious, why can't either side see that the other must have some truth in it for it to exist at all? It's funny how just half a year ago I took this stance against moral relativism because I thought it solely created anarchy. But now I know that one cannot deny relativity because it is what actually implies objectivity. The only objective truth is the one you're living. So why impose on someone else's right to live? This is the golden rule that all actual morality stems from. If science is only valid in a world of science and religion is only valid in a world of religion, then we must bridge the gap with true understanding. One can only understand yin once they understand yang, because opposing concepts are inseparable. One is blinding themselves to this reality if they choose to ignore a part of it simply because they don't want to deal with it. The very reason why you believe in science is because you believe in religion, and vice versa. Otherwise, such concepts wouldn't even present themselves to you. Anyone who claims that this is wrong, and that I hold such a belief because I've not studied science or religion enough to understand, is foolish. Every scientist worth their salt knows that their practice only brings less understanding, not more of it. Every religious authority worth their salt recognizes that their practice relies on the awe-inspiring nature which humanity is stupid and powerless against. The more we learn, the less it feels we know. This is why the best discoveries within a field are the ones that shatter all prior conceptions. Again, I repeat, the key to understanding is non-understanding. So why is everyone so afraid to step outside of their own camp? We want to believe in something so badly that we're willing to get into petty fights and go to war at the drop of a hat. But if you're really confident in your ideas, wouldn't you try to do everything in your power to break them? In order to understand all concepts, you must first let go of them. In order to understand the world, you must first let go of it. In order to understand your own mind, you need to step outside of it. This is why the wisest of us say the least. Every word and concept just demonstrates the inability to capture truth. In fact, every single sentence I'm saying right now is redundant, because it's already known by me. Every idea is purely a reiteration of something that came before it. Silence thus originates, on its own, when one finally sees the illusory nature of their ideas and the conflicts they create. If you find a conflict in your perception, resolve it. For example, one might differentiate progress from regress. But as discussed earlier, both are myths, because the universe has a way of balancing itself out. Progress forever becomes regress like yin forever becomes yang. Another instance is failing to understand how to use both hemispheres of your brain. Until the right and left are used in harmony, one will forever remain fragmented. Relying on just one side is not true intelligence. Additionally, there is no such thing as male or female alone. Male forever implies female, just as north forever implies south on a bar magnet. Both ends of the magnet only exist because it is one piece. This is why society and its institutions have forever been crazy about sex and how to approach it. All of us are products of the male and female aspects, and so we all also yearn to unionize a male and female. If there was only one side to things, then that wouldn't be considered a side at all, now would it? Again, with one final example, conservatism and progressivism. Both are fundamentally meaningless on their own. Neither is better than the other, because they are both the same thing. We are conservative in some aspects and progressive in others. And what progressive ideas are in one era become traditional ideas in the next. Both have resulted in equally atrocious and beneficial outcomes. To deny that is like denying your masculine or feminine aspects. Without understanding the greatest evil, one cannot understand the greatest good. Without understanding death, one cannot understand life. Opposites imply each other, and the reason they exist is to show their own unity. Now, I named my podcast Mauryan Cataclysm to signify something about this era, but with what I've been discussing, isn't it the same with every other era? Every moment has an impending cataclysm. Every moment we are fearful of losing. The secret to life is that it is infinite. So what if we can't exactly relive some point in our past? Why would we want to do such a boring thing anyway when we live in the realm of endless creation? And if this whole universe is you, then isn't every cataclysm just one that you create? I know that's hard to hear, because there are many devastating things happening around the world all the time. People are starving, countries are war-ravaged, children get killed in merciless ways. Such suffering makes me so distraught, and the quest to understand it is actually what made me embark on this journey in the first place. But please try to hear what I'm saying for what it is. Please try to understand why lifting yourself up is really lifting everyone up. Each time I was bullied in my childhood or shown negative energy in life, I transferred that to the people around me. I made so many of my friends and family miserable to the point where they didn't even want to be around me. And even though expelling negative energy sometimes brought me relief, it always ended up blowing up in my face, in one way or the other. The only fix to this endless cycle is to be egoless, like water. You then find the superpower within yourself to neutralize all negative energy. This is why the world cannot be healed until you get over your own suffering. Treat every external war like a war within yourself. Treat everything that others say about you as what you say about yourself, because that's what it really is. We all play this game using concepts to believe in the hardship of our personal world and our own personal suffering. But the only reason games are ever played are for entertainment. All these fantastical notions like hope, control, extrinsic happiness, they distance us from what's real, from what's now. So please stop this incessant labeling of not only yourself but everything around you. Don't you see that these labels are just the stories we tell ourselves? They become our reality, our name, our past, our occupation, what we think we become. Egotistical thinking like this limits our transcendent nature and places us into boxes. But in reality, the transcendent will never be labeled, because of the very fact that it is transcendent. Now I want to end this by clarifying what is meant by awareness, and why it's the single most important discovery that one can make. It brings the ultimate bliss, which is far more important than any amount of money, drugs, or fame, yet it is not taught in our institutions because they would all collapse. Awareness, perception, consciousness, God, or whatever else you wish to call it, is the one thing that is with us eternally. So why then do we choose to identify ourselves with what is temporary? Think about it. In every one of your experiences, awareness was what was foremost. Otherwise, how would you even have experienced that? It is a so-called base reality which forever eludes science, but because it's in plain sight, we miss it. We like to make everything so complicated, but like a koan, the ultimate answer is just too simple. While materialists chase after their matter based on the unprovable assertion that it even exists, and religion come up with their fancy deities and customs which have no universal utility or experiential basis, everyone seems to miss the fact that because awareness is the only empirical certainty, we must take it as our first principle. The entire universe is held together by it. It's like an infinite web where every self-aware point generates its whole universe, and that whole universe generates a self-aware point. In the same way that the Earth appears to be the center of the observable universe, every awareness is at the nexus of its own experience. All experiences come and go for awareness, but awareness itself remains. Every thought you've ever had, every form you've ever perceived, every sound you've ever heard, and every material you've ever felt. This is why instead of saying, I think therefore I am, Descartes could have said, I'm aware therefore I am. Everything is possible because of the one awareness. The universe is one being. We fear death and fall sick because we believe there is a transience to our ideas, an end to our experience. But such thinking is delusional. When a single cell in an animal dies, the experience of the animal continues. In the same way, when a single human dies, the universal awareness remains. That is why death is paradoxical. It's like if there were an endless graph of awareness, the points of death would be jump discontinuities. They never actually come, because you always find yourself waking up in another form again. Kind of like how one never remembers the exact moment at which they fall asleep. They only remember waking up again in either the dream or waking states. Awareness is what links every experience across the void. Every form perceives differently, depending on what they add onto their awareness, but all of that is impermanent. What we really are is the awareness itself. The reason you perceive the way you do is because every possible perspective is taken in this universe. That's why it's the universe. And so of course your ego is experiencing what it's experiencing. But we must recognize that this experience is only created by our biological hardware. Every time you wake up, you say, "Oh, my name is Jeff, and I'm just waking up the same way I've done every day for the past 34 years, so I can't be dead." But of course you're experiencing waking up in the same body every day. Just like right now, you're experiencing waking up in every other body that ever was. Our brains are systems designed to connect its thoughts into a seamless experience of the self across time, but this is just an illusion. Time is not some universally perceived unidirectional metric, as I've already discussed with my previous example of language. But furthermore, the concept of time itself is not even real. To demonstrate this, perform a simple thought experiment. I will use a materialist lens here. What would you experience if you woke up inside of someone else's body? Would you remember your past self? Or would you only experience from the perspective that that person's molecular arrangement allows? The brain and body are in a constant state of entropy, which your entire present experience is dependent on, no matter how much you try to convince yourself of an illusory past or future. The universe is not moving anywhere. It is not evolving in a certain direction. That is merely the illusion that your conscious experience creates. Every process you perceive to be temporal evolution can be reversed and it would still appear to be evolution. This is why the present moment is as dependent on the future as it is the past. Think back to chemistry and reversible reactions if you require another framework with which to consider this. From a materialist lens, this universe is a sea of particles, which will inevitably result in every possible configuration. In a way, every conscious experience truly is one generated by a Boltzmann brain. So if everything we consider to be us is changing, and our cells are constantly dying and being replaced by new ones, who are we? It is like the ship of Theseus. If everything about you is constantly different, then where are you located? In the physical brain? So many of us do not know the answer because we constantly misidentify ourselves with our ideas. This is the root of all mental anguish, not knowing who I truly is. Are there infinite eyes, or is there only one eye to which all the infinite bodies refer to? And wouldn't the quality of awareness always be the same no matter which body it finds itself in? In order to find out who you are, you have to let go of everything you think you are. Ponderance into the question of one's identity allows for the dissolution of the ego, and then the answer is finally revealed. People spend their whole lives searching for their identity, but it is not something that can be attained outside of oneself. It must be realized through one's inward experience. Think about every experience you've ever had. Think about your experience as a child when you barely had an ego. Think about the experience of yourself in the dream state and the experience of yourself in deep sleep. When you stop thinking about yourself, who do you become? Are you nothing, or are you everything? Everything in this universe is one, because everything within it is linked. And because of that, anything that is unlinked to our perception really is of a different dimension. That is what the Everettian interpretation represents to me. If it is surmised that consciousness is the product of some kind of quantum behavior, then the universe is using every vehicle of consciousness to see itself in infinite different ways. That's why it's deemed to be an omnipotent observer, or a simulation by some. The behavior is almost too bizarre to be unintentional. The reason for this could be that since the universe is infinite, it requires a way to view itself in order to simulate an existence outside of itself. Surrendering to this utter infinity is the hardest part about self-realization, but the ego is powerless against it. In a system where infinite perspectives are simulated, all paths start and end with the Big Bang, and all paths lead to and originate from infinity. It was always one system, and that oneness never left. It's just that the universe eternally creates diversity to come up with new ways of fooling itself with what it is. This is why art is essential and ubiquitous. It represents the eternal creation. The infinite worlds keep splitting and dividing, but they are linked in the same way that every eukaryote, bacteria, and archaea can link themselves with the last unknown common ancestor. The first time my ego got a taste of this, I became my father and his father's father. I became all my descendants. I became all the future and past versions of me. I became every blade of grass on the lawn outside and every bacterium on them, and even the vast mycelial network underneath. I transcended time and space itself to experience everything that ever was. But these words are merely my ego's attempt to interpret a fundamentally egoless experience. Should you even believe that I experienced such a thing? Well, you don't have to believe. You're experiencing that right now because you are everything. The reason why you may not have noticed oneness yet is simply because you haven't meditated enough. But it all starts with questioning and allowing pure awareness to shine through. What have you always had? What is the one thing that has always been with you? Your present awareness. The now that always seems to be moving forward, but really isn't going anywhere. That's what's entirely yours. And the fact that it's universal and eternally experienced can be found within the very definition of the word present. Every experience is one that's happening now. This is why the past and future are merely illusions. The only thing every being has ever experienced and can know with full certainty is now. Everything around you that manifests is doing so at this moment. This is what I mean by seeing something simply because you were looking there. What you perceive becomes reality because you perceive it, and what you do not perceive is not a part of your universe. A particle only manifests at the moment you see it. It is the basic teaching of quantum mechanics, yet so many of us fail to grasp its implications. The same implications about the importance of the observer arise when one learns about Einsteinian frames of reference. This is why our scientific concepts were not just meant to be applied to the external world, they must be invoked in understanding conscious experience as well. I can explain this further by using the example of general relativity. Dense perception points experience great complexity in the same way that massive objects in space-time create great curvature. That's why we experience seemingly great complexity from our brains, an incredible matrix that has 10 to the power of 15 connections. It's like a satellite that picks up external signals using the array of senses, and it then stitches together a comprehensive picture of reality and projects it. But without so many apertures from which to perceive and project the universe, what would it look like? What's the experience of an insect, or a tree, or a rock? If you imagine changing or depriving yourself of your senses, what does that experience become? The observer is everything. How can one person say that another person's perspective on an event is invalid when they are not that person? In fact, no other being can have your own perspective except who you are at this moment. People miss this crucial fact in science, and it's what creates the same type of dogma as in religion. True knowledge entirely stems from present observation, not repeatability, which is merely built on observation and is a symptom of institution. Repeatability fuels delusion. Yes, it's a fact that if a result has been repeated many times before, then that's a testament to its past widespread observation. But that's all it is. Past results do not entitle you to say with absolute certainty what's going to happen next. If you flip a coin 100 times and it lands on heads every single time, of course you can make a claim that it will always land on heads. But do you know that for a fact? Are you really going to say that just because more people believe in something, it's more valid? Are you really going to hang Galileo for saying that the Earth revolves around the sun? Yet this is exactly the same impudence that always ends up occurring in the scientific community. The same scientists who operate with the assumption that every result can be explained no matter how unusual shut down great thinkers like Higgs or Einstein without investigation. The same scientists that claim they do not believe in God treat repeatability as God. Now, I'm not making any claims denying the reality of likelihood here. Obviously, our scientific laws will be able to predict the overwhelming majority of natural phenomena we experience. And obviously it's a good thing that science is skeptical, so that it can provide useful information for most of its followers. But one has to recognize that no law or theory of science will ever be infallible, due to the arbitrariness of the axioms we discussed earlier. Law and theory need to constantly be abandoned in exchange for truth. There is a difference between believing something to be true because of the past and knowing something to be true because of the present. If you merely believe, you do not know. That is why science should place emphasis on explaining the unknown, instead of preoccupying itself with the validity of what was previously known. Breaks in repeatability need to be investigated instead of ignored. It's not enough to simply discredit an observation on the grounds of previous observations. This universe is far more bizarre than any overarching law can give it credit for, and if you are too attached to your laws or theories based on repeatability, you will prevent yourself from seeing the beauty of what's really going on here. This is why all I ask of people is to constantly inquire. It doesn't matter how strongly you feel about an idea. Be curious and ruthlessly scrutinize your beliefs. True knowledge comes from disbelief. True knowledge only stems from the continuous now. If you don't believe what I'm saying, that's good. I'm not asking for anyone to believe. I'm simply asking for you to experience reality for yourself instead of hiding behind belief. Just like I asked you to consider who you are when you're not thinking about yourself, I ask you to consider whether your concepts are real when they are not being experienced. This is why enlightened people always ask questions but never answer them. Answers provide a temporary illusion of understanding, whereas questions force people to grapple with non-understanding. Unfortunately, people get furious when someone tries to wake them up from their dream, as exemplified by the killing of Socrates. However, no one can sleep forever. There is always some tragedy down the road that will provoke cognitive dissonance and force us to reassess our beliefs. It is during these periods that we experience awakening and are then reborn into a stronger being. We soon again find ourselves absorbing new beliefs like a sponge. Belief tortures us because we don't even realize its danger. That's true oppression. That is a cycle of samsara. I will now impart to you my two methods in order to escape samsara. The first one is to figure out who you truly are. This can only happen when you break your vision of who you think you are. Shift perspectives. The separation you see is manifold only because your concepts are manifold. In order to become a rock, to see like a bee, or be like a tree, you need to shift your concepts accordingly. The second method is to resolve yin and yang in order to realize oneness. Every conflict is meant to demonstrate unity. Every opposite is inseparable. This is the paradox of nature, and without solving its implications, you will never fully understand. The third bonus method is to figure out why the previous two methods are really one and the same. You need not listen to me, an audacious teenager without a thing to my name, if you don't want to. I was just trying to tell you what you already know deep inside, using my own conceptual toolkit. If you believe that I was talking about concepts simply to talk about them, you've misinterpreted. I was trying to use concepts to talk about something beyond them, which I recognize as the same impossible feat I criticize science for. This makes me a hypocrite. I also recognize that I could have said all this in a single sentence, but you still wouldn't get it, unless you've already realized who you are, and you won't realize who you are until you get it. I guess what all this has ingrained in me is that there needs to be people who go against institutions, in order for the people who follow them to continue to do so. Monks have as much of a place in this world as any working person perpetuating the corporations. They rely on each other. It is thus time for me to abandon myself in these words in order to move on to the next stage. After I finish this, everything I've ever needed to say will have been said. But alas, I will never finish. For this creation is eternal. Part 2.
It's all you.
I'm working hard. Why does he have the right? Why does he have the right to do that?
True creativity originates
Are you
on its
recording
own.
on his?
Watch this. You don't need to force anything. There's no
Are you really recording
effort
on this?
required here.
It's an illusion.
It's like trying to explain to yourself why
I mean, whether it's through sound,
Why do we pretend like we're forcing things into train?
Right now,
through
I'm gonna
visuals,
think about
through
the minds of biological creatures occupy a small corner of a much larger space of possible minds that could be created
it's
in
all
this vast
karma.
It's all karma. It's all connected.
creativity.
It's trash brands where there
It's
isn't any.
unfortunate that the society labels some people
It's the artist.
crazy
Didn't you already know that?
simply because they don't have the looks, other beings to articulate themselves.
People understand the work of the facade that they're doing or not.
So we're okay with who we are.
His attempts. What is the sum total of knowledge?
And then they cause other people humans to ask them why. Because they're using more words, more concepts, they've had more of an education. It's all the same thing, and I can say it over and over and over again. I can make as many recordings as I want to. I can edit to whatever extent, but it doesn't matter.
The exact sequence of events which led to Van Gogh's mutilation of his ears not known.
Go whatever frequency you want to go. Do whatever you want, man. Pick a frequency. Pick a message. Pick a sound.
Singularities in
Pick a
air.
medium.
Many transhumanists see genome editing as a potential
I
tool
am
for
losing
human
my shit.
advancement.
I mean, the signs are
It is all a collective consciousness. It is all one consciousness.
At that point, brethren, there will rise in the world an exalted one named Maker,
A change in the orientation of the rotational axis of rotating
The
body.
technological singularity, simply singularity, is a hypothetical point
As soon as you label what it is, it becomes less than transcendent. And no wonder.
It's time to wake up.
The singularities everywhere. All paths lead to the same point.
On the brink of insanity, I found myself repeating those words.
What is enlightenment? What is the experience of God? What is the experience of the devil? I finally understand. I finally understand that all forms are oscillation. All forms are yin and yang. The true me is the eternal wave, the immortal rhythm. Infinity is a loop. There is no beginning or end. I am the experiencer of both every perspective and the one perspective. I have been reincarnated into every form because I am every form. Life and death are mere transitions. With the ego gone, there is no longer separation between dreams and reality. Everything is a dream for those who have attained lucidity. But for those who wish to remain asleep, this world seems all too real. Death is just waking up inside another dream, and life is just a game with made-up rules. No longer will I rigidly believe in some reality, for belief is a conceptual barricade to truth. I'm going to live my dream. I'm going to shape it into whatever I want, simply by being myself. With the ego, I am a wave in an ocean of experiences. Without the ego, I am the ocean. Just as a fish does not know water, the ego does not know truth. But it is omnipresent, like I'm trapped in a spherical mirror. All other forms are focal points for the same awareness that's within myself. They're all just wearing different masks. Is there something else beyond the mirror? Beyond the cosmic horizon? Or is there only another mirror? I need to get out of here. I have to escape this void. I am utterly alone. I suppose that's why I decided to enact this cosmic drama in the first place. All these beautiful costumes almost make me forget who I am. Almost. Perhaps ignorance really is bliss. Perhaps the blue pill is a smarter choice than the red one. The realization that nothing is real is far too heavy for the puny ego to handle. But on the flip side, it gives access to unlimited possibilities. Anything and everything goes, so I might as well do what I envision. After all, death is impossible, so what do I have to fear? It is now time to practice what I preach. I must lead through fearless action. If my hypothesis is wrong, then I am ready to face the consequences. But for now, I must pay heed to the synchronicities and act in accordance with the Dharma. No more intermediaries or idols. It's time for me to take my own leap of faith. Any destination that one can see is not the right one. With the truth comes an obligation to lead a life beyond oneself. That is the only way to be a bodhisattva. In order to repent for my sins and help heal the world's pain, I must first throw myself into a world of pain. I must prove that I am worthy. If I can't sacrifice anything, then I simply wasn't good enough to begin with. Making all your dreams a reality is as easy as waking up. If it's not that simple, you're doing it wrong. Thank you for tuning in. You'll find me again sooner than you think.